It is a parent's responsibility to make tough choices. Tough choices to protect their child, tough choices to protect their other children, and tough choices to protect the community. And that is what Tim Ferriter did in this case. He was faced with an impossible situation. And he made tough choices to protect Ronan, or Ty, is what we will call him throughout this trial, from himself, from the other children in his home, and from the community. You only have to make one determination in this case, and that is whether or not Tim Ferriter had the criminal intent necessary. That's it. Did he or did he not have the criminal intent? And that will be your guiding question throughout this case. This case is not about whether or not Tim Ferriter made the right choice, because I will be the first to tell you, the defense will be the first to tell you that he did not. But what it is about is the difficulty of parenting, right? Because bad parenting does not make somebody a criminal. Bad parenting does not mean that a person should be charged with a crime. It makes them human. It makes them a parent who is trying to figure out, when faced with a child, as you'll hear throughout the trial, who has consistent and escalating behavioral issues, how to handle them. You will learn more throughout the trial, but I want to try in these next few minutes to share with you what that relationship looked like. In 2009, Tim Ferriter and his wife Tracy took the very long flight to Vietnam to adopt their first son, Ty. At that point, him and his wife Tracy had spent some time in the Honduras, and so they were really motivated to adopt. And the first child that they adopted, Fiona, who you will hear from in this trial, is Chinese. And after they had Fiona, they were really excited to adopt again. And they wanted her to have a sibling that was culturally close to her. While they were waiting for Ty to get the news that they were going to be able to adopt from Vietnam, they had their first biological child, Nola. And within just a few years, they go from this young couple to a little family. They had 3 little babies. And this is really the first iteration of that family before Pierce comes along several years later. Tim and Tracy love these children.
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
They did everything that they could when they were young. Karate, softball, soccer. Ty was in track. He loved Legos. They got him science posters and galaxies. So he had a periodic table of elements and stuff about galaxies in his room because those were his interests. But what we don't know is how our stories will be written. We don't know where our children are going to end up. And as parents, all you can do is try to raise children who make good choices, who are going to be productive members of the community, and hope that that works. And unfortunately for Ronan, it just couldn't. Later in this week, you will hear from a seasoned psychologist, Dr. Sheila Rappa. Dr. Rappa is well respected as a forensic psychologist. She's routinely hired by the state attorney's office. She is routinely court appointed to conduct psychological evaluations in this county, to give opinions about psychiatric or psychological expertise. And her specific experience is working with children like Ty. And so that's what makes her uniquely qualified to speak with you about the records that she's reviewed and the patterns of behavior that she noticed. Ty underwent a neurological examination. And what it shows, and as Dr. Rappa will explain to you, is that neuropsychological evaluation showed elevated levels of a lack of inhibition and clinically elevated levels of a lack of emotional regulation. And as Dr. Rappa will explain to you, these elevated levels are associated with early life brain development, usually when someone's a baby, pre-verbal, or even in utero. And that makes sense because Dr. Rappa reviewed records, early childhood records of Ty. And what they show is that he had malnourishment, he was not well taken care of when he was dropped off at the orphanage and while he was there. We can't know his exact medical history because his biological mother just left him at the orphanage. But the records that Dr. Rappa has reviewed over the course of Ty's life, in addition to some of the depositions taken in this case, other records, they will show you that, for very much lack of a better term, Ty is wired this way. It is a function of brain development. And it's why the Ferriters continued to see patterns of behavior that would not stop. I want to take you through some of those patterns. Since he was a kid, Ronan had aggressive outbursts and tantrums.
Jack, based on the motion of the day.
Overruled for purposes of open.
His parents regularly received emails of him fighting at school, punching other kids, using profanity. Tim and Tracy moved Ronan. Well, let me start with this. He was at a school with his sister Nola where he pretended that a teacher asked him to make an announcement in class. So he was in a different class. He goes into Nola's class and says, "Oh, the teacher asked me to make an announcement." He has his sister stand up and humiliates her in front of the entire class, saying that she's a horrible person. And it was so disturbing to the teacher who was present, who you'll hear from throughout this trial, that she had to report it. Tim and Tracy moved Ronan to an accelerated private school in hopes that the challenging work would engage him. It was sort of a math and science type school, so they thought that that would help him stop. It did not. He stood up in class at that school and asked if the Holocaust was a good thing. He was accused of telling a student that they should get aborted. He got up in class and said that immigrants are more likely to be drug dealers. He brought a screwdriver to class and was waving it in someone's face. He stole another student's laptop, hacked into it, and looked up women getting run over by trains.
Sustained.
And he pretended to be a tutor to a friend of his.
Sustained.
And that happened while he was in
Counsel
the marriage.
approach. All right, Ms. Murad, you may continue.
Ty also pretended to be a tutor to one of his friends and then stole her father's credit card and utilized it.
Overruled as to that.
Thank you, Judge. This is just a handful of the consistent and escalating behaviors Ronan continued to engage in. And he himself will tell you, as the state said in their opening, that he knows that things are wrong, and he continues to do them. He knows that there are consequences, and he continues to do them. And all this time, Tim and Tracy are racking their brains trying to figure out what will change Ronan's behaviors, because they have an entire family here. Right? These kids go to school, they have their own activities, they have a toddler at one point. They have to be able to get through the day-to-day of just being an adult and having a family, be able to send their child to school safely, knowing that other children will remain safe. So they try to get him into activities to kind of take out his energy. And when they see that's not working, they do counseling. They give him the medications that he's prescribed. They try to help him sleep at night because he keeps wandering the house. They cut sugar from his diet on the recommendation of a pediatrician, that maybe that'll help his behavior, and that'll make him less impulsive. This family is going from place to place to place, from appointment to appointment, trying to figure out how to get this child actual help, how to get a diagnosis, and how to get medication that will change his behavior. And as we discussed in voir dire together, what they found was a revolving door of doctors and therapists, and no one was able to offer them the help that they needed. You will see that Tim tried to curtail Ronan's behavior when nothing else worked, and there will be some videos of that. It's not always going to look pretty, just as it doesn't look pretty in real life when a parent gets mad at their kid. Particularly a child, and you must remember when you see the videos, particularly a child who for years and years and years is continuing to engage in these behaviors, who will not stop. In 2019, while living in Havasu, Arizona, Tracy and Tim had their last and youngest child, Pierce. And at that point, they are fearful. Ty, Nola, and Fiona are a little bit older. They're about 10, 11 years old. And Pierce is coming in as an infant. And at this point, Ronan had been hurting other kids at school. He had been engaging in dangerous behaviors. He's walking around at night, and they did not know if an infant could be safe with Ronan in the house. And that is when they made the decision, while he lived inside their home in Arizona, this is not in the garage, this is in a house, to put a lock on his door. And that was not for the purpose of keeping him locked inside at all times. It was not for the purpose of even punishment. It was for the purpose of monitoring him when they couldn't. Because unfortunately, they're in a situation where they cannot leave this child unattended. There has to be somebody constantly watching him, and they cannot do that as two working adults. You'll hear that Ronan or Ty participated in activities. He went to school. You'll see videos of him around the house. And he will tell you himself that the door was not always locked. But they did use it when he couldn't be supervised. Once Pierce was born, they needed a baby room. So they built a room in the Arizona house in the garage for Ty. It had a bed, it had a desk, it had Legos. You'll hear from witnesses who actually saw that room. And Ronan showed it to them. Ty took them in and said, hey, look at my room, and showed them all the toys that he had and the books that he had in the room in Arizona. So right before Christmas of 2021, that's when we get to sort of the time relevant in this case. The Ferriters moved back to Jupiter, where they lived many, many years ago when the kids were young. And they decided to build a similar room for Ronan. It had the bed, desk, books, and toys. You'll see videos of him in his room. He's reading. He's talking to his friends. He has Legos there. He is not allowed to have technology in his room alone because that's not something that they felt was safe, but he had other types of activities. He did have like a school Chromebook that was provided by the school. You'll see him FaceTiming with a friend of his. He had posters up on the wall that he, when he got angry, ripped down himself. That's why the walls will look bare. Both the room in Arizona and the one in Florida had one very big design flaw, and that is that it did not include a bathroom. And this means that Ronan, at night when he was in the room and couldn't be supervised, had to use a bucket for the bathroom if he needed to use the bathroom. During the day, he was permitted to move about the house freely, and he could utilize the bathroom in the house itself. And I'm going to be very honest with you, you're going to see him use the bathroom in that bucket a handful of times over this 4 to 5 week period. He's a kid, so he's not waking up and using the bathroom all the time like probably all of us are. And so he uses it a few times, and it's not going to look pretty. But what you have to remember throughout this case, right, is that this was not some big secret life like the state is presenting. These people went to doctors. They went to therapists. The schools were emailing them back and forth about Ronan's behavior. They had family members and friends see the room in Arizona. In Florida, they were only here for about 4 weeks right before Christmas, and then school started. So this is not some sort of secret life that they had for Ronan. Everybody knew that Tom had behavioral issues. Everybody knew that Tim and Tracy were trying to get a diagnosis so that he could get appropriate help, and it never happened. As you review the evidence in this case, you have to remember that the issue at hand is not whether or not Tim Ferriter is a great dad. It is not whether Tim Ferriter did what you would have done, and it's not even if Tim Ferriter did the right thing, because our own expert, Dr. Rappa, will say that he did not, and that those actions could have been damaging to the child. That does not make his actions a crime. The singular question in this case is whether or not there was criminal intent. Because what Tim did not do is have his child arrested. Not one time. What he did not do is undergo a failed adoption proceeding where you essentially return a child back to the Department of Children and Families.
Objection, improper.
Sustained.
He paid...
Sustained.
Okay.
No need to approach. I sustain the objection.
He paid for private schools so that Ty could have activities that he was engaged in. But he had to make tough choices to protect his son, to protect the other kids in his home, and to protect the community from a child who was already showing, a screwdriver in class, hitting other kids. He had to do that. And though he didn't handle it correctly, his intentions were not criminal. Dr. Rappa will testify, based on her extensive experience and review of the records, that what she sees in this case is not malicious. That what she sees in this case is actually very common for parents with children who have such extensive behavioral issues that are hard to sort of diagnose and pinpoint. At the end of this trial, I'm going to come back up here, after what I expect to be about a week of evidence. And I'm going to ask that you really listen to what Ty says, even in his own testimony. And that you consider what it's like, and that you consider how a parent will
Sustained.
how a parent has to act in these situations. The difficulty that Tim Ferriter experienced over and over and over again. The help that he attempted to give his child over and over and over again. I'm going to ask that you find enough.